threatened or more divided, we face the greatest cascade of crises in our lifetimes. The COVID-19 pandemic has supersized glaring inequalities. The climate crisis is pummeling the planet. Upheaval from Afghanistan to Ethiopia to Yemen and beyond has thwarted peace. A surge of mistrust and misinformation is polarizing people and paralyzing societies. Human rights are under fire, and science is under assault. And the economic lifelines for the most vulnerable are coming too little and too late, if they come at all. Solidarity is missing in action just when we need it most. Perhaps one image tells the tale of our times, the picture we have seen from some parts of the world of COVID-19 vaccines in the garbage, expired and unused. On the one hand, we see the vaccines developed in record time, a victory of science and human ingenuity. On the other hand, we see that triumph undone by the tragedy of lack of political will, selfishness, and mistrust. A surplus in some countries, empty shelves in others. A majority of the wealthier world vaccinated, over 90% of Africans still waiting for the first dose. This is a moral indictment of the state of our world. It is an obscenity. We pass the science test, but we are getting an F in ethics. Excellencies, the quiet alarm bells are also ringing at fever pitch. The recent report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was a code red for humanity. We see the warning signs in every continent and region. Scorching temperatures, shocking biodiversity loss, polluted air, water, and natural spaces, and climate-related disasters at every turn. As we saw recently, not even this city, the financial capital of the world, is immune. Climate scientists tell us it is not too late to keep alive the 1.5-degree goal of the Paris Climate Agreement. But the window is rapidly closing. We need a 45% cut in emissions by 2030. Yet, a recent UN report made clear that with present national climate commitments, emissions will go up by 16% by 2030. That would condemn us to a hellscape of temperature rises of at least 2.7 degrees above pre-industrial levels, a catastrophe. Meanwhile, the OECD just reported a gap of at least $20 billion in essential and promised climate finance to developing countries. We are weeks away from the UN Climate Conference in Glasgow, but seemingly light years away from reaching our targets. We must get serious and we must act fast. Excellencies, COVID and the climate crisis have exposed profound fragilities as societies and as a planet. Yet instead of humility in the face of these epic challenges, we see hubris. Instead of the path of solidarity, we are on a dead end to destruction. At the same time, another disease is spreading in our world today, a melody of mistrust. When people see promises of progress denied by the realities of their harsh daily lives, when they see their fundamental rights and freedoms curtailed, when they see petty as well as grand corruption around them, when they see billionaires joyriding to space while millions go hungry on Earth, when parents see a future for their children that looks even bleaker than the struggles of today, and when young people see no future at all. The people we serve and represent may lose faith not only in their governments and institutions, but in the values that have animated the work of the United Nations for over 75 years. Peace, human rights, dignity for all, equality, justice, solidarity. Like never before, core values are in the crosshairs. A breakdown in trust is leading to a breakdown in values. Promises, after all, are worthless if people do not see results in their daily lives. Failure to deliver creates space for some of the darkest impulses of humanity. It provides oxygen for easy fixes, pseudo-solutions, and conspiracy theories. It is kindling to stoke ancient grievances, cultural supremacy, ideological dominance, violent misogyny, the targeting of the most vulnerable, including refugees and migrants. Excellencies, we face a moment of truth. Now is the time to deliver. Now is the time to restore trust. And now is the time to inspire hope. And I do have hope. The problems we have created are problems we can solve. Humanity has shown that we are capable of great things when we work together. And that is the raison d'être of our United Nations. But let's be frank. Today's multilateral system is too limited in its instruments and capacities in relation to what is needed for effective governance of managing global public goods. It is too fixed on the short term. We need to strengthen global governance. We need to focus on the future. We need to renew the social contract. And we need to ensure a United Nations fit for a new era. That is why I presented my report on our common agenda in the way I did. It provides a 360 degrees analysis of the state of our world with 90 specific recommendations that take on the challenges of today and strengthen multilateralism for tomorrow. Our common agenda builds on the UN Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and the Paris Climate Agreement. It is in line with the mandate I was given by the UN 75 Declaration to seek a pathway to a better world. But to reach that land of our promises, we must bridge great divides. Excellencies, I see 6 great divides, 6 Grand Canyons that we must bridge now. First, we must bridge the peace divide. For far too many around the world, peace and stability remain a distant dream. In Afghanistan, where we must boost humanitarian assistance and defend human rights, especially of women and girls. In Ethiopia, where we call on parties to immediately cease hostilities, ensure humanitarian access, and create the conditions for the start of an Ethiopian-led political dialogue. In Myanmar, where we reaffirm unwavering support to the people in their pursuit of democracy, peace, human rights, and the rule of law. In the Sahel, where we are committed to mobilizing international assistance for regional security, development, and governance. In places such as Yemen, Libya, and Syria, where we must overcome stalemates and push for peace. In Israel and Palestine, where we urge leaders to resume a meaningful dialogue, recognizing the two-state solution as the only pathway to a just and comprehensive peace. In Haiti and so many other places left behind, where we stand in solidarity through every step out of crisis. Excellencies, we are seeing an explosion in seizures of power by force. Military coups are back. And the lack of unity among the international community does not help. Geopolitical divisions are undermining international cooperation and limiting the capacity of the Security Council to take the necessary decisions. A sense of impunity is taking hold. And at the same time, it will be impossible to address dramatic economic and development challenges while the world's 2 largest economies are at odds with each other. Yet I fear our world is creeping towards 2 different sets of economic, trade, financial, and technological rules, 2 divergent approaches in the development of artificial intelligence, and ultimately, the risk of 2 different military and geopolitical strategies. And this is a recipe for trouble. It would be far less predictable than the Cold War. To restore trust and inspire hope, we need cooperation, we need dialogue, we need understanding. We need to invest in prevention, peacekeeping, and peace building. We need progress on nuclear disarmament and in our shared efforts to counter terrorism. We need actions anchored in respect for human rights, and we need a new comprehensive agenda for peace. Excellencies, second, we must bridge the climate divide. This requires bridging trust between North and South. It starts by doing all we can now to create the conditions for success in Glasgow. We need more ambition from all countries in 3 key areas: mitigation, finance, and adaptation. More ambition on mitigation means countries committing to carbon neutrality by mid-century and to concrete 2030 emissions reductions targets that will get us there, backed up with credible actions now. More ambition on finance means developing nations finally seeing the promised $100 billion a year for climate action, fully mobilizing the resources of both international financial institutions and the private sector too. And more ambition on adaptation means developed countries living up to their promise of credible support to developing countries to build resilience to save lives and livelihoods. And this means 50% of all climate finance provided by developed countries and multilateral development banks should be dedicated to adaptation. The African Development Bank set the bar in 2019 by allocating half of its climate finance to adaptation. Some donor countries have followed their lead. All must do so. My message to every member state is this: don't wait for others to make the first move. Do your part. Around the world, we see civil society, led by young people, fully mobilized to tackle the climate crisis. The private sector is increasingly stepping up. Governments must also summon the full force of their fiscal policy-making powers to make the shift to green economies. By taxing carbon and pollution instead of people's income, to more easily make switch to sustainable green jobs. By ending subsidies to fossil fuels and freeing up resources to invest back into healthcare, education, renewable energy, sustainable food systems, and social protection for their people. By committing to no new coal plants. If all planned coal power plants become operational, we will not only be clearly above 1.5 degrees, we will be well above 2 degrees, and the Paris targets will go up in smoke. This is a planetary emergency. We need coalitions of solidarity between countries that still depend heavily on coal and countries that have the financial and technical resources to support their transition. We have the opportunity and the obligation to act. Excellencies, third, we must bridge the gap between rich and poor, within and among countries. That starts by ending the pandemic for everyone, everywhere. We urgently need a global vaccination plan to at least double vaccine production and ensure that vaccines reach 70% of the world's population in the first half of 2022. This plan could be implemented by an emergency task force made up of present and potential vaccine producers, the World Health Organization, ACT accelerator partners, and international financial institutions working with pharmaceutical companies. We have no time to lose. A lopsided recovery is deepening inequalities. Richer countries could reach pre-pandemic growth rates by the end of this year, while the impacts may last for years in low-income countries. Is it any wonder? Advanced economies are investing nearly 28% of their gross domestic product into economic recovery. For middle-income countries, that number falls to 6.5%. And it plummets to 1.8% for the least developed countries, a tiny percentage of a much smaller amount. In sub-Saharan Africa, the International Monetary Fund projects that cumulative economic growth per capita over the next 5 years will be 75% less than the rest of the world. Many countries need an urgent injection of liquidity. I welcome the issuance of $650 billion in special drawing rights by the International Monetary Fund. But these SDRs are largely going to the countries that need them least. Advanced economies should reallocate their surplus SDRs to countries in need. SDRs are not a silver bullet, but they provide space for sustainable recovery and growth. I renew also my call for a reformed and more equitable international debt architecture. The debt service suspension initiative must be extended to 2022 and should be available to all highly indebted, vulnerable, and middle-income countries that request it. This would be solidarity in action. Countries shouldn't have to choose between servicing debt and serving people. With effective international solidarity, it would be possible at the national level to forge a new social contract that includes universal health coverage and income protection, housing and decent work, quality education for all, and an end to discrimination and violence against women and girls. I call on countries to reform their tax systems and finally end tax evasion, money laundering, and illicit financial flows. And as we look ahead, we need a better system of prevention and preparedness for all major global risks. We must support the recommendations of the Independent Panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response. I have put forward a number of other proposals in our common agenda, including an emergency platform and a Futures Lab. Mesdames et Messieurs les représentants, quatrièmement, nous devons combler le fossé entre les genres. Le Covid-19 a mis à nu et exacerbé la plus vieille injustice du monde, le déséquilibre de pouvoir entre les hommes et les femmes. Lorsque la pandémie a frappé, les femmes représentaient la majorité des travailleurs de première ligne. Elles ont été les premières à perdre leur emploi et les premières à mettre leur carrière en suspens pour s'occuper de leurs proches. Les fermetures d'écoles ont touché des filles de manière disproportionnée, freinant leur parcours et augmentant les risques d'abus, de violence et de mariage d'enfants. Combler le fossé entre les femmes et les hommes n'est pas seulement une question de justice pour les femmes et les filles. Cela change la donne pour l'humanité tout entière. Les sociétés plus égalitaires sont aussi plus stables et plus pacifiques. Elles ont de meilleurs systèmes de santé et des économies plus dynamiques. L'égalité des femmes est essentiellement une question de pouvoir. Si nous voulons résoudre les problèmes les plus difficiles de notre époque, nous devons de toute urgence transformer notre monde dominé par les hommes et changer l'équilibre de pouvoir. Cela requiert plus de femmes dirigeantes dans les parlements, les cabinets ministériels et les conseils d'administration. Cela exige que les femmes soient pleinement représentées et puissent apporter leur pleine contribution partout. J'exhorte les gouvernements, les entreprises et les autres organisations à prendre des mesures audacieuses, y compris des critères de référence et des quotas, pour établir la parité homme-femme à tous les niveaux de la hiérarchie. À l'Organisation des Nations Unies, nous avons atteint cela au sein de l'équipe dirigeante et parmi les responsables de bureaux de pays. Nous continuerons jusqu'à ce que nous parvenions à la parité à tous les niveaux. Et dans le même temps, nous devons nous opposer aux lois régressives qui institutionnalisent la discrimination de genre. Les droits des femmes sont des droits humains. Les plans de relance économique devraient accorder une place centrale aux femmes, notamment par des investissements à grande échelle dans l'économie des soins. Et nous devons adopter un plan d'urgence pour lutter contre la violence de genre dans chaque pays. Pour atteindre les objectifs de développement durable et bâtir un monde meilleur, nous pouvons et nous devons combler le fossé entre les femmes et les hommes. Mesdames et Messieurs les représentants, cinquièmement, pour redonner confiance et raviver l'espoir, nous devons réduire la fracture numérique. La moitié de l'humanité n'a pas accès à l'Internet. Nous devons faire en sorte que tout le monde soit connecté d'ici à 2030. Telle est la vision de mon plan d'action de coopération numérique. Saisir les promesses du numérique tout en se prémunissant contre ces dangers. L'un des plus grands périls auxquels nous sommes confrontés, c'est le pouvoir croissant des plateformes numériques et l'utilisation des données à des fins néfastes. Une vaste bibliothèque d'informations est en train d'être constituée sur chacun d'entre nous. Et nous n'y avons même pas accès. Nous ne savons pas comment ces informations ont été recueillies, par qui, ni dans quel but. Mais nous savons que nos données sont utilisées à des fins commerciales pour augmenter encore les profits. Nos comportements et habitudes deviennent des produits qui sont vendus comme des contrats à terme. Nos données sont également utilisées pour influencer nos perceptions et nos opinions. Les gouvernements et d'autres entités peuvent les exploiter pour contrôler et manipuler le comportement des citoyens, bafouant aussi ainsi les droits humains des individus ou groupes et sapant la démocratie. Ce n'est pas la science-fiction C'est notre réalité d'aujourd'hui et cela exige un débat sérieux. Il en va de même pour d'autres dangers de l'ère numérique. Je suis par exemple certain que toute future confrontation majeure, et j'espère évidemment qu'une telle confrontation n'aura jamais lieu, commencera par une cyberattaque massive. Quel cadre juridique nous permettrait de faire face à une telle situation? Aujourd'hui, des armes autonomes peuvent prendre pour cible des personnes et les tuer sans intervention humaine. De telles armes devraient être interdites. Mais il n'y a pas de consensus sur la manière de réglementer ces technologies. Afin de rétablir la confiance et raviver l'espoir, nous devons placer les droits humains au cœur de nos efforts pour que l'avenir numérique de tous soit sûr, équitable et ouvert. Excelencias, en sexto lugar y por último, tenemos que salvar la brecha entre generaciones. Los jóvenes heredarán las consecuencias de nuestras decisiones, buenas y malas. Al mismo tiempo, se espera que nazcan 10.900 millones de personas antes de que termine el siglo. Necesitamos sus talentos, ideas y energías. Nuestra agenda común propone la celebración el año que viene de una cumbre para la transformación de la educación con el fin de abordar la crisis del aprendizaje y ampliar las oportunidades al alcance de los 1.800 millones de jóvenes de hoy. Los jóvenes necesitan algo más que apoyo. Necesitan tener un asiento en la mesa. Por ello nombraré un enviado especial para las generaciones futuras y crearé la Oficina de la Juventud de las Naciones Unidas. Y las contribuciones de los jóvenes serán fundamentales en la cumbre del futuro, tal y como queda recogido en nuestra agenda común. La juventud necesita una visión de esperanza para el futuro. Una investigación realizada recientemente en 10 países ha demostrado que la mayoría de los jóvenes sufre altos niveles de ansiedad y angustia por el estado de nuestro planeta. Un 60% de sus futuros votantes se sienten traicionados por sus gobiernos. Debemos demostrar a los niños y niñas y a los y a las jóvenes que a pesar de la gravedad de la situación, el mundo tiene un plan y que los gobiernos están comprometidos con su aplicación. Tenemos que actuar ahora para superar las grandes divisiones y salvar a la humanidad y al planeta. Excellencies, with real engagement, we can live up to the promise of a better, more peaceful world. That is the driving force of our common agenda. The best way to advance the interests of one's own citizens is by advancing the interests of our common future. Interdependence is the logic of the 21st century, and it is the lodestar of the United Nations. This is our time, a moment for transformation, an era to reignite multilateralism, an age of possibilities. Let us restore trust, let us inspire hope, and let us start right now. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary General for his presentation. The General Assembly will now turn to Agenda Item 8, General Debate. I will now deliver a statement from the rostrum. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Your Excellencies, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished ministers, I am honored to welcome you all to the opening of the general debate as we kick off the high-level week of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. I'm even more pleased to welcome all of you back to an in-person session of the General Assembly. A year and a half, we have suffered in silence and in anxiety. A year and a half, we have worried, we have grieved, and we have waited. Let us wait no more. Excellencies, I would like to express my deep gratitude to His Excellency Volkan Bozkır, President of the 75th session, for his stewardship of this august General Assembly during very trying times. I would also like to thank the Secretary General for his leadership and wisdom and look forward to working with him. I must also express heartfelt gratitude to both President Ibrahim Mohamed Saleh and the people of the Maldives for putting their faith and trust in me. I'm truly humbled and deeply proud to stand as a small islander at this great podium on behalf of our people. Our country may be small, and I may be even smaller. But today, we are mighty. Today, we stand with giants. My standing here today in the General Assembly is a reflection of the success of President Saleh's foreign policy. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have plenty of challenges, but for just a moment, let us celebrate all that we have achieved in the past 2 years. In record time, humanity has developed multiple viable vaccines for COVID-19. Scientists and researchers from dozens of countries collaborated on a remarkable feat of human ingenuity. And the largest vaccine rollout in the history of mankind is currently underway. While certainly not without flaws, it is monumental in its undertaking. For these accomplishments alone, we should be proud. Excellencies, before I outline the 76th session and the hopeful theme I've chosen to pursue, allow me to ask you this. Where do we want to be at this time next year? What is it that we, as a people, intend to achieve over the next 12 months? From my discussions with many in this room, from social media, from the UN 75 survey, and from the Secretary General's Common Agenda report, the answer is clear. The world wants peace of mind. The people want solutions to the challenges we collectively face, and challenges are not in short supply. Fragility, conflict, COVID-19, climate change, the list goes on. These issues and more keep our citizens awake at night. They fuel a collective anxiety and a worry that things are progressively getting worse. They worry that we are not doing enough to solve the problems facing our world. And my friends, they are not wrong. We can do more. We know this in our hearts. On COVID-19, we have the vaccine, the know-how, the capacity for distribution. We lack only the political support. On climate change, we have incredible innovations in renewable energy, in adaptive technologies, and in transitioning away from fossil fuels. We lack again only the political support and the related financing. On conflict and instability, we have near universal desire for nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Yet, we falter at the finish line, leaving treaties unratified. On humanitarian concerns, we have enough food and water to provide for the planet many, many times over. Yet, there's genuine fear that we will see the return of famine and the impacts of drought. Hundreds of millions will require humanitarian assistance by year's end. My friends, there are moments in time that are turning points, and this is one such moment. We can choose a path of isolationism, of mutual destruction, of a slow retreat of human experiment, or we can forge together a new path, a sustainable and resilient path that changes the future of our planet. COVID-19 may have been a tragedy of the grandest scale, but it may also have been a canary in the coal mine, warning us of the perils we face if we continue to drag our feet, to avoid making the hard but necessary choices. Excellencies, I wholeheartedly believe in the power of humanity to overcome these challenges. You cannot live in the Maldives and face the existential threat of sea level rise without having hope on humanity. Well, that hope extends far. I'm hopeful that we too can overcome differences, that we can bypass protocols and obstacles to transform our societies. With this hopeful vision for a better tomorrow, I intend to pursue 5 rays of hope that will direct the efforts of the General Assembly this year. First, I will stand firmly behind the need to ensure vaccine equity, to vaccinate the world. As President of the General Assembly, I intend to host a high-level meeting on just this issue and to address the practical obstacles that have emerged around supply, storage, and distribution. Second, on the longer-term recovery from COVID-19, I will push for a recovery that builds back better, stronger, greener, and bluer. By following the paths laid out by Agenda 2030, we can pivot away from destructive practices and embrace a better future. Third, we must return our attention to the climate crisis, which has taken a backseat to COVID-19. The IPCC report and others speak for themselves. We are no longer on the wrong path. Excellencies, we are on the edge of the cliff. I'm pleased to note that I will host a series of events on climate action. The first in the lead up to COP26 will help to build ambition and ensure that action is very much on the agenda. We must bridge the capacities needed to actually deliver on climate promises. It is one of the things to have innovative renewable technologies. It is an entirely different thing if a country or a community cannot absorb that technology. I believe we can close the gap. Another event later in the session will acknowledge the other major environmental efforts underway on the ocean, on desertification, on biodiversity, and will aim to address these interlocking issues during this super session on the environment. My fourth ray of hope focuses on human rights, one of the fundamental pillars of our organization. We must uphold the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights above all else, particularly during moments of conflict or strife, as we have so recently seen. We must also endeavor to always empower and support those most vulnerable and those who have been disadvantaged. As President of the General Assembly, I'm determined to have a cross-cutting gender approach to my presidency, including advocating for a Build Back Better approach to COVID-19 that prioritizes gender-sensitive policies and initiatives. Fifth, and finally, UN reform and revitalization must continue, and it must also continue here in the General Assembly. This is not about balance of power, this is about efficiency. Every organ of the United Nations must be at its peak, must be able to deliver as it was intended to. One of the first things I will do in this regard is to listen to our constituents by engaging better with the civil society organizations and by bringing more youth on board, such as through our Youth Fellowship Program. We will hear about the priorities that matter to people and come to know new ways that the General Assembly can make a difference. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to remind you of what this hall represents. Out of the ashes of the greatest war, of the greatest atrocities of human history, we came together and agreed to collaborate to tackle the challenges we face. For the 7+ billion constituents around the world, this is what they see when they think of the United Nations. iconic world leaders standing before a marble green backdrop, debating not whether to help, but how to help. Let us not let them down. We have never been so technologically advanced. We have never been so connected. We have never had the wealth, the resources, or the know-how that we have now. There's nothing in our path to stop us but ourselves. Let us be the United Nations that people want us to be. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in the darkest days of the pandemic, when cities were shuttered and vaccines still a dream, the peoples of the world came together as never before. They left messages of support on their windows. They sang for each other from balconies. They clapped in the evenings for their frontline workers, their heroes. They prayed in unison, asking for that miracle that could give us back the normalcy that we took for granted. It was hope and a sense of shared humanity that allowed them to do this. Let us give them hope now. I thank you. Before giving the floor to the first speaker, I wish to remind members of the following. A representative who is physically present in the Assembly Hall is to deliver a statement of her or his own for the general debate. Alternatively, pursuant to General Assembly Decision 75/573 of 14th July 2021, and without setting a precedent for future general debates, each member state, observer state, and the European Union may submit a pre-recorded statement which will be played in the Assembly Hall after introduction by their representative who is physically present in the Assembly Hall. Introduction of the pre-recorded statements will be made by delegations from their national seats. In accordance with the same decision, in addition to the verbatim records, the President of the General Assembly will circulate as a document of the Assembly a compilation of document of the statements delivered by means of pre-recorded statements submitted to the President no later than the day on which the pre-recorded statement was played in the Assembly Hall. And such pre-recorded statements will be attached to the verbatim records of the meetings. Submissions in this regard should be made to e-statements@un.org. The list of speakers for the general debate has been established on the basis that statements should be no longer than 15 minutes to enable all the speakers to be heard at a given meeting. I would like to appeal to all speakers to deliver their statements at a reasonable pace so that interpretation in the other official United Nations languages may be provided properly. I would also like to draw your attention to the decision taken by the General Assembly at previous sessions, namely that the practice of expressing congratulations inside the General Assembly Hall after a speech has been delivered is strongly discouraged, including in light of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. After delivering their statements from the rostrum, speakers are invited to exit the General Assembly Hall through room GA 200, located behind the podium, before returning to their seats. May I take it that the General Assembly agrees to proceed accordingly during the general debate of the 76th session? It is so decided. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Jair Messias Bolsonaro, President of the Federative Republic of Brazil. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Jair Messias Bolsonaro, President of the Federative Republic of Brazil, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Ok. Bom dia a todos. Senhor Presidente da Assembleia Geral, Abdullah Shahid, Senhor Secretário-Geral das Nações Unidas, Antônio Guterres, senhores chefes de Estado e de Governo e demais chefes de delegação, senhoras e senhores, é uma honra abrir novamente a Assembleia Geral das Nações Unidas. Venho aqui mostrar o Brasil diferente daquilo publicado em jornais ou visto em televisões. O Brasil mudou e muito depois que assumimos o governo em janeiro de 2019. Estamos há 2 anos e 8 meses sem qualquer caso concreto de corrupção. O Brasil tem um presidente que acredita em Deus, respeita a Constituição, valoriza a família e deve lealdade ao seu povo. Isso é muito. É uma sólida base se levarmos em conta que estávamos à beira do socialismo. Nossas estatais davam prejuízos de bilhões de dólares no passado. Hoje são lucrativas. Nosso Banco de Desenvolvimento era usado para financiar obras em países comunistas, sem garantias. Quem honrava esses compromissos era o próprio povo brasileiro. Tudo isso mudou. Apresento agora um novo Brasil, com sua credibilidade já recuperada diante do mundo. O Brasil possui o maior programa de parceria de investimentos com a iniciativa privada de sua história. Programa que já é uma realidade e está em franca execução. Até aqui foram contratados 100 bilhões de dólares de novos investimentos e arrecadados 23 bilhões de dólares em outorgas. Na área de infraestrutura, leiloamos para a iniciativa privada 34 aeroportos e 29 terminais portuários. Já são mais de 6 bilhões de dólares em contratos privados para novas ferrovias. Introduzimos o sistema de autorizações ferroviárias, o que aproxima nosso modelo ao americano. Em poucos dias recebemos 14 requerimentos de autorizações para novas ferrovias, com quase 15 bilhões de dólares em investimentos privados. Em nosso governo, promovemos o ressurgimento do modal ferroviário. Como reflexo, menor consumo de combustíveis fósseis e redução do custo do Brasil, em especial no barateamento de produção de alimentos. Grande avanço vem acontecendo na área do saneamento básico. O maior leilão da história do setor foi realizado em abril, com concessão ao setor privado dos serviços de distribuição de água e esgoto no estado do Rio de Janeiro. Temos tudo o que o investidor procura: um grande mercado consumidor, excelentes serviços, tradição de respeito a contratos e confiança no nosso governo. Também anuncio que nos próximos dias realizaremos o leilão para a implementação da tecnologia 5G no Brasil. Nossa moderna e sustentável agricultura de baixo carbono alimenta mais de 1 bilhão de pessoas no mundo e utiliza apenas 8% do território nacional. Nenhum país do mundo possui uma legislação ambiental tão completa quanto a nossa. Nosso Código Florestal deve servir de exemplo para outros países. O Brasil é um país com dimensões continentais, com grandes desafios ambientais. São 8,5 milhões de quilômetros quadrados, dos quais 66%, 2/3, são vegetação nativa, a mesma desde o seu descobrimento em 1500. Somente no bioma amazônico, 84% da floresta está intacta. abrigando a maior biodiversidade do planeta. Lembro que a região amazônica equivale à área de toda a Europa Ocidental. Antecipamos de 2060 para 2050 o objetivo de alcançar a neutralidade climática. Os recursos humanos e financeiros destinados ao fortalecimento dos órgãos ambientais foram dobrados, com vistas a zerar o desmatamento ilegal. E os resultados desta importante ação já começaram a aparecer. Na Amazônia, tivemos uma redução de 32% do desmatamento no mês de agosto, quando comparado a agosto do ano anterior. Qual país do mundo tem uma política de preservação ambiental como a nossa? Os senhores estão convidados a visitar a nossa Amazônia. O Brasil já é um exemplo na geração de energia, com 83% advinda de fontes renováveis. Por ocasião da COP26, buscaremos consenso sobre as regras do mercado de crédito de carbono global. Esperamos que os países industrializados cumpram efetivamente seus compromissos com o financiamento de clima em volumes relevantes. O futuro do emprego verde está no Brasil. Energia renovável, agricultura sustentável, indústria de baixa emissão, saneamento básico, tratamento de resíduos e turismo. Ratificamos a Convenção Interamericana contra o Racismo e formas correlatas de intolerância. Temos a família tradicional como fundamento da civilização. E a liberdade do ser humano só se completa com a liberdade de culto e de expressão. 14% do território nacional, ou seja, mais de 110 milhões de hectares, uma área equivalente à Alemanha e França juntas, é destinada às reservas indígenas. Nessas regiões, 600 mil indígenas vivem em liberdade e cada vez mais desejam utilizar suas terras para a agricultura e outras atividades. O Brasil sempre participou em missões de paz da ONU, de Suez até o Congo, passando pelo Haiti e Líbano. Nosso país sempre acolheu refugiados. Em nossa fronteira com a vizinha Venezuela, a operação acolhida do governo federal já recebeu 400 mil venezuelanos deslocados devido à crise político-econômica gerada pela ditadura bolivariana. O futuro do Afeganistão também nos causa profunda apreensão. Concederemos visto humanitário para cristãos, mulheres, crianças e juízes afegãos. Nesses 20 anos dos atentados contra os Estados Unidos da América, em 11 de setembro de 2001, reitero nosso repúdio ao terrorismo em todas as suas formas. Em 2022, voltaremos a ocupar uma cadeira no Conselho de Segurança da ONU. Agradeço aos 181 países, em um universo de 190, que confiaram no Brasil. Reflexo de uma política externa séria e responsável, promovida pelo nosso Ministério das Relações Exteriores. Apoiamos uma reforma do Conselho de Segurança da ONU, onde buscamos um assento permanente. A pandemia pegou a todos de surpresa em 2020. Lamentamos todas as mortes ocorridas no Brasil e no mundo. Sempre defendi combater o vírus e o desemprego de forma simultânea e com a mesma responsabilidade. As medidas de isolamento e lockdown deixaram um legado de inflação, em especial nos gêneros alimentícios no mundo todo. No Brasil, para atender aqueles mais humildes, obrigados a ficar em casa por decisão de governadores e prefeitos e que perderam sua renda, concedemos um auxílio emergencial de $800 para 68 milhões de pessoas em 2020. Lembro que terminamos 2020, ano da pandemia, com mais empregos formais do que em dezembro de 2019, graças às ações do nosso governo com programas de manutenção de emprego e renda que nos custaram cerca de 40 bilhões de dólares. Somente nos primeiros 7 meses deste ano, criamos aproximadamente 1.800.000 novos empregos. Lembro ainda que o crescimento para 2021 está estimado em 5%. Até o momento, o governo federal distribuiu mais de 260 milhões de doses de vacinas e mais de 140 milhões de brasileiros já receberam, pelo menos, a primeira dose, o que representa quase 90% adulta. 80% da população indígena também já foi totalmente vacinada. Até novembro, todos que escolheram ser vacinados no Brasil serão atendidos. Apoiamos a vacinação. Contudo, o nosso governo tem se posicionado contrário ao passaporte sanitário ou a qualquer obrigação relacionada à vacina. Desde o início da pandemia, apoiamos a autonomia do médico na busca do tratamento precoce, seguindo recomendação do nosso Conselho Federal de Medicina. Eu mesmo fui um desses que fez tratamento inicial. Respeitamos a relação médico-paciente na decisão da medicação a ser utilizada e no seu uso off-label. Não entendemos porque muitos países, juntamente com grande parte da mídia, se colocaram contra o tratamento inicial. A história e a ciência saberão responsabilizar a todos. No último 7 de setembro, data da nossa independência, milhões de brasileiros, de forma pacífica e patriótica, foram às ruas, na maior manifestação de nossa história. Mostrar que não abre mão da democracia, das liberdades individuais e de apoio ao nosso governo. Como demonstrado, o Brasil vive novos tempos. Na economia, temos um dos melhores desempenhos entre os emergentes. Meu governo recuperou a credibilidade externa e hoje se apresenta como um dos melhores destinos para investimentos. É aqui, nesta Assembleia Geral, que vislumbramos um mundo de mais liberdade, democracia, prosperidade e paz. Que Deus abençoe a todos.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Federative Republic of Brazil for the statement just made, and I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Joseph R. Biden, Jr., President of the United States of America. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Joseph R. Biden, Jr., President of the United States of America, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, my fellow delegates, to all those who dedicate themselves to this noble mission of this institution, it's my honor to speak to you for the first time as President of the United States. We meet this year in a moment of intermingled with great pain and extraordinary possibility. We've lost so much to this devastating pandemic that continues to claim lives around the world and impact so much on our existence. We're mourning more than 4.5 million people, people of every nation, from every background. Each death is an individual heartbreak, but our shared grief is a poignant reminder that our collective future will hinge on our ability to recognize our common humanity and to act together. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the clear and urgent choice that we face here at the dawning of what must be a decisive decade for our world. A decade that will quite literally determine our futures. As a global community, we're challenged by urgent and looming crises, wherein lie enormous opportunities if we can summon the will and resolve to seize these opportunities. Will we work together to save lives, defeat COVID-19 everywhere, and take the necessary steps to prepare ourselves for the next pandemic, for there will be another one? Or will we fail to harness the tools at our disposal as the more virulent and dangerous variants take hold? Will we meet the threat of challenging climate, the challenging climate we're all feeling, already ravaging every part of our world with extreme weather? Or will we suffer the merciless march of ever-worsening droughts and floods, more intense fires and hurricanes, longer heat waves, and rising seas? Will we affirm and uphold the human dignity and human rights under which nations in common cause more than 7 decades ago formed this institution? Will we apply and strengthen the core tenets of the international system, including the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as we seek to shape the emergence of new technologies and deter new threats? Or will we allow those universal principles to be trampled and twisted in the pursuit of naked political power? In my view, how we answer these questions in this moment, whether we choose to fight for our shared future or not, will reverberate for generations yet to come. Simply put, we stand, in my view, at an inflection point in history. And I'm here today to share with you how the United States intends to work with partners and allies to answer these questions, and the commitment of my new administration to help lead the world toward a more peaceful, prosperous future for all people. Instead of continuing to fight the wars of the past, we are fixing our eyes on devoting our resources to the challenges that hold the keys to our collective future. Ending this pandemic, addressing the climate crisis, managing the shifts in global power dynamics, shaping the rules of the world on vital issues like trade, cyber, and emerging technologies, and facing the threat of terrorism as it stands today. We've ended 20 years of conflict in Afghanistan, and as we close this period of relentless war, we're opening a new era of relentless diplomacy, of using the power of our development aid to invest in new ways of lifting people up around the world, of renewing and defending democracy, of proving that no matter how challenging or how complex the problems we're going to face, government by and for the people is still the best way to deliver for all of our people. And as the United States turns our focus to the priorities and the regions of the world, like the Indo-Pacific, that are most consequential today and tomorrow, we'll do so with our allies and partners through cooperation at multilateral institutions like the United Nations to amplify our collective strength and speed our progress toward dealing with these global challenges. It is a fundamental truth of the 21st century within each of our countries and as a global community that our own success is bound up in others succeeding as well. To deliver for our own people, we must also engage deeply with the rest of the world. To ensure that our own future, we must work together with other partners, our partners, toward a shared future. Our security, our prosperity, and our very freedoms are interconnected, in my view, as never before. And so, I believe we must work together as never before. Over the last 8 months, I prioritized rebuilding our alliances, revitalizing our partnerships, and recognizing they are essential and central to America's enduring security and prosperity. We have reaffirmed our sacred NATO alliance to Article 5 commitment. We're working with our allies toward a new strategic concept that will help our alliance better take on evolving threats of today and tomorrow. We renewed our engagement with the European Union, a fundamental partner in tackling a full range of significant issues facing our world today. We elevated the Quad partnership among Australia, India, Japan, and the United States to take on challenges ranging from health security to climate to emerging technologies. We're engaging with regional institutions from ASEAN to the African Union to the Organization of American States to focus on people's urgent needs for better health and better economic outcomes. We're back at the table in international forums, especially the United Nations, to focus attention and to spur global action on shared challenges. We are re-engaged at the World Health Organization and working in close partnership with COVAX to deliver life-saving vaccines around the world. We rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement, and we're running to retake a seat in the Human Rights Council next year at the UN. And as the United States seeks to rally the world to action, we will lead not just with the example of our power, but, God willing, with the power of our example. Make no mistake, the United States will continue to defend ourselves, our allies, and our interests against attack, including terrorist threats, as we prepare to use force, if any is necessary. But to defend our vital U.S. national interest, including against ongoing and imminent threats. But the mission must be clear and achievable, undertaken with informed consent of the American people, and whenever possible, in partnership with our allies. U.S. military power must be our tool of last resort, not our first. And it should not be used as an answer to every problem we see around the world. Indeed, today, many of our greatest concerns cannot be solved or even addressed through the force of arms. Bombs and bullets cannot defend against COVID-19 or its future variants. To fight this pandemic, we need a collective act of science, and political will. We need to act now to get shots in arms as fast as possible and expand access to oxygen, tests, treatments to save lives around the world. And for the future, we need to create a new mechanism to finance global health security that builds on our existing development assistance and global health and a global health threat council that is armed with the tools we need to monitor and identify emerging pandemics so that we can take immediate action. Already, the United States has put more than $15 billion toward the global COVID response. We've shipped more than 160 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine to other countries. This includes 130 million doses from our own supply and the first tranches of the 500 million doses of Pfizer vaccine we purchased to donate through COVAX. Planes carrying vaccines from the United States have already landed in 100 countries, bringing people all over the world a little dose of hope, as one American nurse termed it to me. A dose of hope, direct from the American people, and importantly, no strings attached. And tomorrow, at the U.S.-hosted Global COVID-19 Summit, I'll be announcing additional commitments as we seek to advance the fight against COVID-19 and hold ourselves accountable around specific targets on 3 key challenges: saving lives now, vaccinating the world, and building back better. This year has also brought widespread death and devastation from the borderless climate crisis. The extreme weather events that we have seen in every part of the world, and you all know it and feel it, represent what the Secretary General has rightly called Code Red for humanity. And the scientists and experts are telling us that we're fast approaching a point of no return in a literal sense. To keep within our reach the vital goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, every nation needs to bring their highest possible ambitions to the table when we meet in Glasgow for COP26. And then to have to keep raising our collective ambition over time. In April, I announced the United States' ambitious new goal under the Paris Agreement to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the United States by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by 2030, as we work toward achieving a clean energy economy with net zero emissions by 2050. And my administration is working closely with our Congress to make critical investments in green infrastructure and electric vehicles that will help us lock in progress at home toward our climate goals. And the best part is, making these ambitious investments isn't just good climate policy, it's a chance for each of our countries to invest in ourselves and our own future. It's an enormous opportunity to create good-paying jobs for workers in each of our countries and to spur long-term economic growth that will improve the quality of life for all of our people. We also have to support the countries and people that will be hit the hardest and that have the fewest resources to help them adapt. In April, I announced the United States will double our public international financing to help developing nations tackle the climate crisis. And today, I'm proud to announce that we'll work with the Congress to double that number again, including for adaptation efforts. This will make the United States a leader in public climate finance, and with our added support, together with increased private capital and from other donors, we'll be able to meet the goal of mobilizing $100 billion to support climate action in developing nations. As we deal with these crises, we're also encountering a new era, an era of new technologies and possibilities that have potential to release and reshape every aspect of human existence. And it's up to all of us to determine whether these technologies are a force to empower people or to deepen repression. As new technologies continue to evolve, we'll work together with our democratic partners to ensure that new advances in areas from biotechnology to quantum computing, 5G, artificial intelligence, and more are used to lift people up, to solve problems, and advance human freedom, not to suppress dissent or target minority communities. And the United States intends to make a profound investment in research and innovation, working with countries at all stages of economic development to develop new tools and technologies to help us tackle the challenges of this second quarter of the 21st century and beyond. We're hardening our critical infrastructure against cyber attacks, disrupting ransomware networks, and working to establish clear rules of the road for all nations as it relates to cyberspace. We'll reserve the right to respond decisively to cyber attacks that threaten our people, our allies, or our interests. We will pursue new rules of global trade and economic growth that strive to level the playing field so that it's not artificially tipped in favor of any one country at the expense of others. And every nation has the right and opportunity to compete fairly. We will strive to ensure that basic labor rights, environmental safeguards, and intellectual property are protected, and that the benefits of globalization are shared broadly throughout all our societies. We'll continue to uphold the long-standing rules and norms that have formed the guardrails of international engagement for decades, that have been essential to the development of nations around the world. Bedrock commitments like freedom of navigation, adherence to international laws and treaties, support for arms control measures that reduce the risk and enhance transparency. Our approach is firmly grounded and fully consistent with the United Nations mission and the values we've agreed to when we drafted this charter. These are commitments we all made and that we're all bound to uphold. And as we strive to deal with these urgent challenges, whether they're long-standing or newly emerging, we must also deal with one another. All of the major powers of the world have a duty, in my view, to carefully manage their relationships so they do not tip from responsible competition to conflict. The United States will compete and will compete vigorously and lead with our values and our strength. We'll stand up for our allies and our friends and oppose attempts by stronger countries to dominate weaker ones, whether through changes to territory by force, economic coercion, technical exploitation, or disinformation. But we're not seeking, say it again, we are not seeking a new Cold War or a world divided into rigid blocs. The United States is ready to work with any nation that steps up and pursues peaceful resolution to shared challenges, even if we have intense disagreements in other areas, because we'll all suffer the consequences of our failure if we do not come together to address the urgent threats like COVID-19 and climate change, or enduring threats like nuclear proliferation. The United States remains committed to preventing Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon. We're working with the P5+1 to engage Iran diplomatically and to seek a return to JCPOA. We're prepared to return to full compliance if Iran does the same. Similarly, we seek serious and sustained diplomacy to pursue the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We seek concrete progress toward an available plan with tangible commitments that would increase stability on the peninsula and in the region, as well as improve the lives of the people in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. We must also remain vigilant to the threat of terror that terrorism poses to all our nations, whether emanating from distant regions of the world or in our own backyard. We know the bitter sting of terrorism is real. We've almost all experienced it. Last month, we lost 13 American heroes and almost 200 innocent Afghan civilians in a heinous terrorist attack at the Kabul airport. Those who commit acts of terrorism against us will continue to find a determined enemy in the United States. The world today is not the world of 2001, though. And the United States is not the same country we were when we were attacked on 9/11 20 years ago. Today, we're better equipped to detect and prevent terrorist threats, and we are more resilient in our ability to repel them and to respond. We know how to build effective partnerships to dismantle terrorist networks by targeting their financing and support systems, countering their propaganda, preventing their travel, as well as disrupting imminent attacks. We'll meet terrorist threats that arise today and in the future with a full range of tools available to us, including working in cooperation with local partners so that we need not be so reliant on large-scale military deployments. One of the most important ways we can effectively enhance security and reduce violence is by seeking to improve the lives of the people all over the world who see that their governments are not serving their needs. Corruption fuels inequality, siphons off a nation's resources, spreads across borders, and generates human suffering, is nothing less than a national security threat in the 21st century. Around the world, we're increasingly seeing citizens demonstrate their discontent, seeing the wealthy and well-connected grow richer and richer, taking payoffs and bribes, operating above the law, while the vast majority of the people struggle to find a job or put food on the table, or to get their businesses off the ground, or simply send their children to school. People have taken to the streets in every region to demand that their governments address people's basic needs, give everyone a fair shot to succeed, and protect their God-given rights. And in that chorus of voices, across languages and continents, we hear a common cry, a cry for dignity, simple dignity. As leaders, it's our duty to answer that call, not to silence it. The United States is committed to using our resources and our international platform to support these voices, listen to them, partner with them to find ways to respond that advance human dignity around the world. For example, there's an enormous need for infrastructure in developing countries. But infrastructure that is low quality or that feeds corruption or exacerbates environmental degradation may only end up contributing to greater challenges for countries over time. Done the right way, however, with transparent, sustainable investment in projects that respond to the country's needs and engage their local workers to maintain high labor and environmental standards, infrastructure can be a strong foundation that allows societies in low and middle-income countries to grow and to prosper. That's the idea behind the Build Back Better world. And together with the private sector and our G7 partners, we aim to mobilize hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure investment. We will also continue to be the world's largest contributor to humanitarian assistance, bringing food, water, shelter, emergency health care, and other vital life-saving aid to millions of people in need. When the earthquake strikes, the typhoon rages, or disaster anywhere in the world, the United States shows up. We'll be ready to help. And at a time when nearly 1 in 3 people globally do not have access to adequate food just last year, the United States is committing to rallying our partners to address immediate malnutrition and to ensure that we can sustainably feed the world for the decades to come. To that end, the United States is making a $10 billion commitment to end hunger and invest in food systems at home and abroad. Since 2000, the United States government has provided more than $140 billion to advance health and strengthen health systems, and we will continue our leadership to drive these vital investments to make people's lives better every single day. Just give them a little breathing room. And as we strive to make lives better, we must work with renewed purpose to end the conflicts that are driving so much pain and hurt around the world. We must redouble our diplomacy and commit to political negotiations, not violence, as a tool of first resort. To manage tensions around the world, we must seek a future of greater peace and security for all people of the Middle East. The commitment of the United States to Israel's security is without question, and our support for an independent Jewish state is unequivocal. But I continue to believe that a two-state solution is the best way to ensure Israel's future as a Jewish democratic state, living in peace alongside a viable, sovereign, and democratic Palestinian state. We're a long way from that goal at this moment, but we must never allow ourselves to give up on the possibility of progress. We cannot give up on solving raging civil conflicts, including in Ethiopia and Yemen, where fighting between warring parties is driving famine, horrific violence, human rights violations against civilians, including the unconscionable use of rape as a weapon of war. We'll continue to work with the international community to press for peace and bring an end to this suffering. As we pursue diplomacy across the board, the United States will champion the democratic values that go to the very heart of who we are as a nation and a people: freedom, equality, opportunity, and a belief in the universal rights of all people. It's stamped into our DNA as a nation, and critically, it's stamped into the DNA of this institution, the United States. We sometimes forget, I quote the opening words of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, quote, "The equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world." The founding ethos of the United Nations places the rights of individuals at the center of our system. And that clarity and vision must not be ignored or misinterpreted. The United States will do our part, but will be more successful and more impactful if all of our nations are working toward the full mission to which we are called. That's why more than 100 nations united again around a shared statement, and the Security Council adopted a resolution outlining how we'll support the people of Afghanistan moving forward, laying out the expectations to which we'll hold the Taliban when it comes to respecting universal human rights. We all must advocate for women, the rights of women and girls to use their full talents, to contribute economically, politically, and socially, and pursue their dreams free of violence and intimidation. From Central America to the Middle East to Africa to Afghanistan, wherever it appears in the world. We all must call out and condemn the targeting and oppression of racial, ethnic, and religious minorities whether it occurs in Xinjiang or northern Ethiopia or anywhere in the world. We all must defend the rights of LGBTQI individuals so they can live and love openly without fear, whether it's Chechnya or Cameroon or anywhere. As we steer our nations toward this inflection point and work to meet today's fast-moving, cross-cutting challenges, let me be clear. I am not agnostic about the future we want for the world. The future will belong to those who embrace human dignity, not trample it. The future will belong to those who unleash the potential of their people, not those who stifle it. The future will belong to those who give their people the ability to breathe free, not those who seek to suffocate their people with an iron hand. Authoritarianism, the authoritarianism of the world, may seek to proclaim the end of the age of democracy, but they're wrong. The truth is, the democratic world is everywhere. It lives in the anti-corruption activists, the human rights defenders, the journalists, the peace protesters. On the front lines of this struggle in Belarus, Burma, Syria, Cuba, Venezuela, and everywhere in between. It lives in the brave women of Sudan who withstood violence and oppression to push a genocidal dictator from power and who keep working every day to defend their democratic progress. It lives in the proud Moldovans who helped deliver a landslide victory for the forces of democracy with a mandate to fight graft, to build a more inclusive economy. It lives in the young people of Zambia who harnessed the power of their vote for the first time, turning out in record numbers to denounce corruption and chart a new path for their country. And while no democracy is perfect, including the United States, we'll continue to struggle to live up to the highest ideals to heal our divisions. And we face down violence and insurrection. Democracy remains the best tool we have to unleash our full human potential. My fellow leaders, this is a moment where we must prove ourselves the equals of those who come before us, who with vision and values and determined faith in our collective future built our United Nations, broke the cycle of war and destruction, and laid the foundations for more than 7 decades of relative peace and growing global prosperity. Now, we must again come together to affirm the inherent humanity that unites us is much greater than any outward divisions or disagreements. We must choose to do more than we think we can do alone so that we'll accomplish what we must together. Ending this pandemic and making sure we're better prepared for the next one. Staving off climactic climate change and increasing our resilience to the impacts we already are seeing. Ensuring a future where technologies are a vital tool to solving human challenges and empowering human potential, not a source of greater strife and repression. These are the challenges that we will determine what the world looks like for our children and our grandchildren and what they'll inherit. We can only meet them by looking to the future. I stand here today for the first time in 20 years with the United States not at war. We've turned the page. All the unmatched strength, energy, and commitment, will, and resources of our nation are now fully and squarely focused on what's ahead of us, not what was behind. I know this. As we look ahead, we will lead. We will lead on all the greatest challenges of our time, from COVID to climate, peace and security, human dignity and human rights, but we will not go it alone. We will lead together with our allies and partners and in cooperation with all those who believe as we do that this is within our power to meet these challenges, to build a future that lifts all of our people and preserves this planet. But none of this is inevitable. It's a choice. And I can tell you where America stands. We will choose to build a better future. We, you and I, we have the will and capacity to make it better. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot afford to waste any more time. Let's get to work. Let's make our better future now. We can do this. It's within our power and capacity. Thank you. God bless you all.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the United States of America for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. May I request representatives to remain seated while we